Well, good evening. How's everybody doing tonight? I'm Lee Love, and I'm your host here for tonight on Photo Mentor TV. Thank you for joining me. We're here every Friday night at 9 p.m. Eastern and 6 p.m. Pacific. I guess, would that change now? I don't know. I always forget. Seems like it's different. Anyway, never mind. Thanks for joining us. Again, this is Photo Mentor TV. The idea here is to educate, encourage, and mentor new photographers, answer your questions, give you straight answers if I know them. If not, I'll tell you that, but give you straight answers on all things photography related, and also help educate you and make you a better photographer and get more enjoyment out of photography, whatever that may mean for you. I know everybody has a different idea of what they want out of photography, which is great. Certainly a lot of things we can all do, no matter what you're into, whether it's macro photography, wedding photography, portrait photography, astrophotography, blah, blah, blah. So there's always something there to learn. Anyway, this is the reason I do this. People ask me a lot of times, well, what's the purpose of this show? Why do you do this? Why do you have the Facebook group and all that kind of stuff? And the motivation for me was, quite frankly, frustration. I got tired of seeing bad information posted, wrong information, myths, a lot of things people read on the internet but are not real practical, or they've never used them themselves. So anyway, the purpose here is to give you straight answers, like I said before, and real world advice from someone that's been doing this an awful long time. So anyway, if you like what we're doing here, I would really appreciate it if you would go over to our YouTube channel, which is youtube.photomentor.tv, or you can go to the Facebook. If you're on YouTube, you can go to Facebook, and that's facebook.photomentor.tv, and would really appreciate if you'd like the page. If you're on Facebook, share it, of course, and the same thing for YouTube channel. It would be great if you'd subscribe to the channel and like the videos that we're doing there. It means a lot to me. Let's see, what else? A couple of announcements. I'll tell you what we're going to do tonight is a little different. We're going to be doing part 2 of the learning to see as an artist. I did this a couple of months ago, maybe a month or two ago, and it was really well received. And the problem was I didn't realize there was so much material I needed to cover, and so it got a little long, and so I decided to break this up into 2 parts. Maybe go to 3 parts. I don't know. There's a lot of information I'm going to cover tonight. So we're not going to do too much in the question category. Mainly to be, if you have questions, please ask them. I'd be glad to try and address them. But we got a lot of stuff to go over, so I'm going to kind of just jump right into that. A couple of things before we do that, though, just to remind you guys that on the first Friday of every month is Photo Review Friday. I do these again here on the first Friday. Obviously, the reviews are all anonymous, so doesn't matter if you're just starting out, doesn't matter your experience, doesn't even matter if you're using an iPhone. I love to see your work. I love to be able to help you, encourage you, and give you some pointers on some things to help improve your photography. The work is not really reviewed on whether I like or don't like your image. This is the mistake I see that frustrates me when I see people get likes and stuff like that on Facebook. Well, it doesn't matter whether you like it or not. That's so subjective. Everybody, there's going to have half the people are going to like it, half the people are not going to like it. So what I do is I review the images based on composition, technical merit, and subject or storytelling. And so I may make my own comments, of course, if I like the image or whatever, but the main thing is to review them a little more objectively. If you're interested in submitting your photos, again, the next one will be on April 2nd. And so if you're interested in submitting your photos, please go to review.photomentor.tv. A couple of questions there. I want to know how long you've been shooting mainly, because that way I know how to kind of judge your work. If you're just getting started, then that has a bearing on the level of work and the kind of feedback I'm going to give you. So anyway, be great to have you join us for that first Friday of the month. April 2nd will be the next one. So go ahead and submit those right away. so I can start working on those, getting those collected and organized. Let's see. The other thing is, again, we have a Facebook group. If you're interested in joining the Facebook group, it's a very different Facebook group, I believe, than most of the others. It is, it's very encouraging, and again, there's no slamming or demeaning or pointing you to YouTube or that kind of stuff. If you have a question, we're going to do our best to answer it, and it's just a very encouraging place. If you're interested in getting help, this is the place to go. If you're interested in showing off how much you think you know, then this is not the place to go, and I would encourage you just not to join, because we won't last long. So anyway, that's the deal on that. Tonight, I'm going to be covering, as I said before, part 2 of learning to see like an artist, and I think you guys are going to enjoy this. I put a lot of work into putting this together, being able to articulate to you guys what you need to look at, because a lot of times I noticed that, again, when people give feedback or quote-unquote constructive criticism on these groups, it's not based on anything. It's just based on, oh, I like this, I like that, oh, maybe you could do this, maybe you could do that, but it's not, there's no reference point. And so what I'm trying to do is give you some reference points on how to judge your own work and how to judge other work and how to tell whether you're improving or not, because it gets very discouraging sometimes, I know, when we look at our own work and we go, oh my gosh, I don't think I'm improving. I've been shooting a year or whatever, and I don't think I'm getting anywhere. So this is to give you some guidelines to help understand where your work is and maybe how to improve and the things you need to learn about. So I think that's it. I think let's jump right in and so, because we got a lot to cover, as I said before. So the first thing I want to tell you guys about, or kind of explain, is that we're talking here about a language. It's a visual language, and this is the thing. You have to understand that if you're trying to talk Spanish or speak Spanish or English, or which I don't do very well, unfortunately. I think my wife says English is my second language, even though that's the only language I speak. But it's important for us to understand the structure of a language. Okay, if we're going to be communicating with someone, then we need to know the basics. This is language, sentence structure, nouns, pronouns, that type of thing. Well, photography is no different. Photography and art uses a language to communicate. Now, this isn't a language that is like something that is made up. It's something, well, I mean, it is made up, but the point is, it's something that's been done over many, many years, and the human brain reacts different ways to different language terms and languages and shapes and color and stuff like that. I'm going to go into a lot of detail on that. But the point I'm trying to make here is that if you don't understand what the language is, or you don't understand at least the elements of the language, then how are you going to communicate, right? So an image, your photo should have a story, should tell something about it. There should be an intent behind it. Otherwise, just a snapshot. A lot of nice pictures, I'd be, oh, that's really nice, color's nice, but what does it mean? Why did you shoot it that way? What angle did you shoot it at? Why did you shoot it at that angle? What lens did you pick? All these things have meaning. And what I'm trying to do here tonight is to get you to understand some of those elements and maybe think about them next time you're doing out shooting. Now, let me make one thing, make a point here. I am not proposing that I'm an art teacher. Okay, I wish I were, but I'm not. So there's going to be a lot more of this information you can get if you take some classes or read some stuff online or buy some books. So if you really want to dive into this, what these issues are on understanding the elements of art, then I encourage you to do that. Let me give you a quick story. A number of years ago, I took a course called drawing on the right side of your brain, with the right side of your brain. And I thought, well, because I've always wanted to be able to draw, but I've never been very good at it. Well, they taught you how to look at things differently, how to view an image differently, and how to draw shapes, not interpret what the image is. The point I'm trying to make is that it really opened my eyes as to anybody can learn this stuff and anyone can implement it, and you can be an artist. You can be a better photographer if you learn how to use these tools, you study these tools, and you implement these tools in your photography. So that's what I'm getting at here. That's the purpose of tonight. And so I think hopefully this will stimulate you and get you to want to know even more information. Okay. All right. So again, composition is a language, and what a lot of people talk about composition, I notice, again in groups and forums and things like that, but I don't think they really understand it. That composition is not just rule of thirds or things like that. The composition is the arrangement of a lot of different elements, and there are 7 elements we're going to go over tonight. But these elements are things you need to understand and learn how to compose or arrange. It would be just like building a house, right? You need to understand about nails and hammers and wood and saws before you're able to build a house or build a birdhouse even. And so if you don't understand what the language is, you don't understand the basics of the language, then how do you expect to learn composition? So the 7 elements of art, then there's some people have 8. Some people put perspective in here as the 8th one. It really doesn't matter. But the 7 are line, shape, form, space, texture, value, and color. We're going to go into each of these in detail, but I think you'll recognize these when you start seeing some of the photo or some of the examples I'm going to give you, and you'll start to see where this makes sense. And some maybe some images that you've seen that you really liked and you never really understood why you like them. And then when you start learning these elements, you'll say, oh, okay, now I understand what it was about that photo that I really enjoyed. Okay, so the first one is lines. Now, lines are really, there's different kinds of lines. There's vertical lines, horizontal, zigzag curves, no special, it's not a straight line, but they do have different meanings. And this is the part I was talking about before. We often don't understand this or recognize because it's subconscious. But like, for example, certain lines, like vertical lines, denote height and strength. And horizontal lines may subconsciously remind you of distance or stability. And so a graphic designer understands these things. These are the things that they're taught in learning graphic design, is how to use certain lines. When they're designing a logo, certain lines or the way a logo looks uses these tools very much so when designing a graphic layout. So that's why it's pleasing and why maybe you may not be able to do it and why they can. So lines are very, very important in understanding and drawing the viewer into a photo. So for example, this is an example of lines. I mean, we've all seen these. These are lines of diminishing lines. We've all heard about this. But the point is that if you look at this, then the line starting from the outside going to and getting narrower, what does it do? It tells you distance. You know that that's far away because the lines are converging. And so the brain looks at that and says, oh, okay, that's really, really far away. So by using those lines, you can denote or convey certain pieces of information in your photograph. And so you want to look at that and think about that when you're shooting. The other thing is, you want to have those lines maybe starting from the corners of the image. Now, I had to crop this image and everything to get it to fit in this format. But if you want those lines to come in from the corner, and that draws your viewer attention to the center of the image. This is also something that I find a lot of problem with, is that people aren't intentional about their photos. I preach this over and over in that you want to be able to guide the viewer in the frame. You only have this small frame. Your job as a photographer is determine where you want people to look. I call it the hero. What's the hero of the shot? The other term I use is squinting. It's not truly squinting, but if you were, metaphorically squinting at a picture, what would be the first thing that you would see? That's what you want to draw people's eye to. And you'll see more examples of this in a minute. The second element that people talk about, or that's used in art, is shapes. Now you may say, well, wait a minute, hadn't shapes and lines the same? Well, lines are not really closed. They're typically, again, as we saw in the other one, they can just go from one edge to the other. But shapes are typically closed areas. They're squares or round or donuts or whatever, but they typically have different, points to them or whatever. And that also has a subconscious level to the human brain. So, for example, when you have angles, really sharp angles, that's perceived as dangerous. The brain sees that as possibly a danger signal. Rectangular shapes are viewed as dependable, more structured, that type of thing. Curves and circles are more chaotic and adaptable. Although circles can many times mean other things. Circles, if you notice that, look at a logo sometime, and you'll find that, for example, banks and financial institutions typically use certain colors, which I'll talk about in a minute, and they also use certain shapes. They're typically square or rectangular because that has a subconscious feeling of strength and viability, where a round shape or some kind of a smooth shape will be more artistic, more smooth, more soothing, that type of thing. So designers use these techniques when they're building logos, and you should be using them as well when you're looking at photos or when you're making photos, images. The other thing to think about in this is here's an exercise for you. Go out and next time when you shoot, don't look at the objects. Ignore the object. In other words, it's not a stop sign. It's an octagonal piece of metal that's very thin, okay? It's not a car. It's a piece of metal, and it's got round shapes and square shapes. And so, in other words, break down what you're photographing into the shapes. Don't look at the object as a whole. Look at it. Look at the empty space, what's called the white space, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. And you'll find that many times you'll see things in that image that you didn't recognize before. It's also one of the techniques that artists use in drawing. Instead of drawing the shape, they'll actually draw the negative space, the empty space. So instead of drawing a tree, they'll draw the white areas in between the tree. And then the tree emerges because of that. So anyway, this may sound kind of crazy, but just try it. Okay. So that's shape. So there again, this is not a great example. You could almost say this one has lines and shapes in it, but it's example. If you look at there's shapes on the floor, there's shapes on the wall. The wall itself is a shape, and it's at an angle. Obviously the paintings are shapes. The ceiling's a shape, but all of these shapes together are very geometric, and so therefore it has a message to it. It makes it more interesting and pleasing to the human brain. And so by looking at these shapes and using these shapes in your photography, you'll find that you can actually convey a lot more information and a lot of different interesting information than you will if just doing, just photographing straight on. In other words, making these shapes at an angle makes them much more interesting. And hello, Dusty. Dusty's joining me tonight. Nice to see you on there, Dusty. Thank you. Another person who, Dusty is somebody that I've watched over the last 6 months or so, really improving her photography. I was looking at the stuff you posted tonight. I haven't had a chance to comment on it in the group, but really, really looks nice from what I saw. So good job. Okay, the next area is form. Now, this one's a little bit a little kind of, you go, well, wait a minute, isn't this just somewhat of a shape? Well, typically it's a more three-dimensional looking kind of object or form. It takes up more volume and weight and width, more like a building would have more form to it than shapes would, although some do. But a shape is really great for creating depth and light and angles and also depth of field, because if you don't have, so you got to remember, I think we forget sometimes, we are trying to take a three-dimensional world and convey it using a two-dimensional medium, right? Just paper or a screen. So what I'm trying to get you to think of is, how can you take these elements of art and use them to create depth and dimension in your photos? And so lines, as I showed you before, would be one, shapes would be another one, and this one here would be another one, which would be form. I'll give you another example here. So this is a pretty interesting photo. This uses a lot of different elements, but obviously depth of field, the distance, the color. But if you look at the form, just the shape of the item and the lines in the wood, it creates a very interesting, I think, shape or form. It's also a very interesting bed. I don't know what that would be like to sleep on, but it's kind of, awful, very sparse. Have you noticed? Now that I think about it, nothing else in the room. Anyway, but as far as art or as far as form, this has a lot of different form. It's three-dimensional. It has shape. It has depth. It has shadow. It has a lot of elements, but the main one is form, and being able to give you the ability to make it a much more interesting photo and take that three-dimensional world and represent it in a two-dimensional medium. Okay, so the next one is space. So space is, again, and we hear a lot about this, space is really the distance between things. So, like for example, if you want something to be further away, well, then you would place it behind another object, right? You'd put distance between the foreground and the background, and that gives you a representation of depth. It also gives you a representation of foreground and background. Negative space conveys clean, empty, minimalistic, and where cluttered, like there's sometimes people will put their subjects very close to the edge of the frame. And to me, that makes me a little uncomfortable. It's, number one, it goes against my training. But number two, I think it's supposed to do that. I think subconsciously, when you're looking into the frame, or the edge of the frame, it's a very crowded looking scene. So here's an example of empty space, or white space, as it's called in the design world. Hello, Patrick. How you doing, buddy? In Texas these days? I forgot where you were last time I talked to you. My buddy Patrick's traveling the world as a nomad, or maybe just mad. I'm not sure. Anyway, but this is an example of empty space showing loneliness, for example. So it's got a cart. It's got some dollar bills in it. So this could say a lot of things. I mean, it could be interpreted as a lot of different things. But the empty space, all the white space around it, gives it that emptiness feeling or loneliness feeling. And so don't be afraid to use white space or empty space when you're composing your images, especially this one's, if you notice, composed on the far right instead of right in the center, which makes it more interesting. The eye is drawn to, the white space actually draws your eye to the right because there's nothing there to hold it. And you're going to immediately go to the cart and start looking at the cart and examining that and making some interpretation. So white space or space is a very important aspect of art and something you should really consider when you're photographing something. Don't use that whole frame, but not everything has to be in the frame. There's nothing wrong with composing it something where it's empty. Now, let me give you the drawback of that. And the point is, you got to do it intentional. You can't just have, one of the things I'll see is a lot of people will have a lot of empty space at the top, okay, of a portrait, with a family or something, and then the family down below. But that's not done intentionally, I don't believe. It doesn't, at least it doesn't look like the ones I see. It all looks like it's just not paying attention to framing. So if you're trying to draw attention to a family or a portrait, then I think you want to crop that down and bring it in a little closer. But if you're trying to show a product or an object or a single person, then maybe you can use that white space left and right, especially. You can do it vertically but it's a little easy. It seems to work better left to right, in my opinion. But again, depends on what you're trying to say. You're the artist here, and people are going to interpret it different ways. But try and use these tools to convey that information so that at least you understand, or the person understands what you're trying to do. See, you don't want to be accidental. You want to be intentional is what I'm trying to get you to do. May not be successful, but try to be intentional in how you use that frame. So you want to be able to use that space the best you can, but if you need to be able to show loneliness or someone, get an emotion across, you can certainly do that with using white space or empty space. Okay, the next one is texture. Now, texture, most people, I know when I first thought of texture, the first thing I thought of was macro photography, but it's not. You can do much more with texture than just macro photography. Texture can be used to show off, again, here an example I use for a product photography. Okay, people that are a lot of people will buy one of these soft boxes or these white boxes, and they put an object in and photograph it for eBay or whatever. But if you're trying to do product photography, the problem with that is it's lit all around the entire object, which is great because it gives you even lighting. But if you're trying to show off an object that has texture, a sweater or something else, it could even just be, remote control. If you want to show that it has texture and you want to show the buttons, then you want that light to come in at an angle. So therefore, texture can be in anything. It's not just texture meaning, a wall or the typical macro kind of texture. Although I think here's a example I use for texture. Now, this is an interesting one because it kind of goes back to what I was saying in that it uses light to demonstrate the texture and to show off the texture. But you can see that there's texture all around it, at the top, the bottom, even when there's light, where there's not light, where it's darker, and it just is full of texture. And that's, to me, what makes this image interesting. If everything was real smooth, it would still have some form to it. You would still be able to use the form to be able to make an interesting and tell a story, but the texture in this image is what really makes a difference. And also because the texture is so dramatically different in different areas, it's even more interesting. You got the texture on the right, which is darker. It's kind of horizontal. You got texture on the left, on the vertical, and that makes it more. It's darker than even yet. And then of course you've got the color and the texture in the middle. So this is an image that works almost solely because of texture. Obviously, lighting is, you need light to be able to demonstrate texture and to show the texture, but the texture of this image is what really makes it work, and why it's such an impressive photo. Okay, the next one is value. Now, value in this example, I'm talking about value in the sense of perceived tones. Typically, value is referred to as in white and black, or photography and luminosity. In fact, if you want to look into this more, look into Ansel Adams' something called the zone system, and he had a system whereby he could extrapolate the exposure by just looking at it and taking a meter reading. He would take a meter reading of the bright spot, that would be zone 10, and then he would take an exposure reading where there was no light, pure black. That was zone 0. And then that would give him an understanding of where the exposure was based on how to capture the white and the brightest part and the darkest part of an image. Because you got to remember, when you're shooting with film, your latitude, you don't have necessarily 14 stops of dynamic range to be able to capture all that stuff. So you got to squeeze all that into maybe 8, 9 stops. It depends on the film. And on color film, it was even less, slide film. So it was very important to be able to examine an image, look on the luminosity and the shades, and determine where that exposure was. So if you look at this picture right here, again, the middle would be, that would be kind of a skin tone in the middle right there. So, and this is a good example again of something where you've got a lot of different range going on there. Got whites, there's no detail in the white, again that's zone 10. And you got blacks where there's no detail in the blacks, and that's going to be zone 0. But this is how you create an interesting image, is by being able to understand this. Now a lot of people, again, a lot of the mistakes I see people make is they don't, this is why exposure is so important, and getting exposure right. Because otherwise you don't capture the full dynamic range of the image. A lot of people say, well, I'll just shoot on RAW and I'll just bring it back in RAW. But RAW doesn't necessarily allow you to do that. You can do some things, but you can also go too far in one direction or the other. And when you bring up the blacks, for example, if you underexpose the image, it brings up the noise. If you overexpose the image too much, and you try and bring down the exposure to be able to, or highlights to be able to capture and get some more detail in those highlights, there's nothing there to capture. It's gone. So understanding your range of your objects, understanding the values here and what this means and how to capture them is very, very important. Now, not just from a photographic or from a, I should say, from a technical standpoint, but also from an emotional standpoint. All the things I'm talking about here are all based on interpretation and how the brain interprets them. It's not just about technically capturing, it's about what am I trying to say. We've all seen images that are really kind of, art noir kind of thing, where it's really dark and moody and things like that, but it still has a full range of light and values. It's not just all black. I notice a lot of people I've seen will post things and they'll say, I really like that dark, moody look, but that has to do more with shadow, not overall, in my opinion, overall exposure. So just by bringing the exposure down and making an image overall dark doesn't necessarily make it moody. It just makes it muddy from a value standpoint. So what you want to be able to do is you still want to have those highlights by using the by using a high value there, okay, that the whites, but that doesn't mean you still can't have a very moody image by having a lot of shadow in it. In fact, a lot of my work has that. I also like a nice dramatic image in my work if I'm left to my own design, not doing client work, doing my own personal work. And but that has to do with using these values to convey certain things. It's not just about making it moody. Why are you making it moody? In other words, you wouldn't take a small child and yeah, I like that. Thanks, Sue Ann. Sue Ann says it's moody versus muddy. And that being of course, she's the word wizard that I call her. She's amazing copywriter. And so exactly right. It's about being moody, not muddy. And if you don't have all that information in there in the image, if you don't capture that, then it's just going to be gray. And gray does not necessarily make an image moody or interesting. So, okay. So I probably dwell on this enough, but it's an important one. And the seventh one is one of my favorites. And the seven is color. And I've been a real big fan of color my entire career. There was, probably most people don't know this gentleman. His name is Pete Turner. Pete Turner shot a lot of jazz albums back in the early, I don't know, 70s, I guess, 80s. And he has some very famous ones, but this is back when, again, shooting film and color was not as easy as it is now, where you can just go and crank up the saturation slider. And so he was very, very big in using Kodachrome and things like that to bring out very vibrant color. And I was very influenced by that. I really love that dramatic color images. And so even today, you'll see some of that in my own work. But color is a very interesting thing, and color has a lot of meaning behind it. And I'll give you some examples of that. But basically, you're talking about hue, three properties of. You'll notice when you look at Lightroom or Photoshop, you have hue, chroma, and intensity, and then a value, and that's what makes up color. So, so the other thing about color, and this is something you may or may not know, you may have heard the term, but there's a color temperature. And the temperature of the color, not the physical temperature, but the way it's represented, is done in something called Kelvin. And that's Kelvin's, not as in not Kelvin's Klein. It's not Calvin Klein's. It's Kelvin's. And Kelvin was a guy that developed this many, many decades ago. I think in the 1910, 1919, 1920, somewhere around there, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, so you'll notice on your slider in Lightroom, and you'll also note in your camera that you can set color temperature. Well, this is what the scale would look like. So anything that's below 3000 generally is considered a warm tone. Anything above 5000 is considered a cool tone, which is kind of backwards when you think about it, because you'd think it would be the other way around. At least I do. But anyway, so like a light bulb for an incandescent lamp is going to be around 3200 degrees Kelvin. And obviously, when you buy all the flash photography, all the flash systems you can get are daylight balance, and you're going to find that they're going to fall somewhere between 5000 and 6500. Normally 5600 Kelvin is what you're going to find them come out to. A lot of the LEDs nowadays, the ones I'm using here, for example, these lights are also around 5600 degrees Kelvin. So they're daylight balanced. Now, why is this important? Why do you care about this? Well, first of all, you want to, again, the mistake people make is, oh, I'll just shoot on RAW, and if I make a mistake, I can correct it. Well, what if you're in mixed lighting conditions where you have incandescent and daylight, or cool tones and warm tones? So that's, and the cameras have gotten much, much better, I admit. So auto will get you very, very close, but understanding color temperature also has to do with what you're trying to convey in a scene, what you're trying to tell, the story you're trying to tell. Color has a very big impact on that. And I'll show you an example of that, what I'm talking about here. For example, if you look at, again, you can argue with this, but I think it's generally known psychologically that red is a danger, kind of a warning kind of a thing. Orange denotes energy. Yellow would kind of be a nice warm feeling, a happiness feeling. Green is growth for obviously reasons, because of nature and plants and stuff like that. Blue is trust. This is what I was referring to before when I was talking about the logos. You'll find a lot of banks use the color blue because it's a very trusting color. It's a very comforting color. It denotes, again, trust, financial stability, that type of thing. Purple, luxury. You'll see that sometimes in very flamboyant dresses or furniture, things like that. Black is mystery, and white is health. So this is the way, again, you can take argument with this, but these are the kinds of things that the human brain automatically responds to, whether you're aware of it or not. Now, the other thing, and this is kind of a small picture, you probably can't see it very well, but on the right there is the color wheel. And what I want you to point out is that these colors have what's called complementary colors. They're actually opposites, which is kind of odd, but so you have blue at the bottom, lower, like maybe at, I guess that would be 6, 7, 8 o'clock maybe, okay? And then you have orange up there at 2 o'clock. Well, because they're complete opposites on the color wheel, they actually are complementary. They work really well together. So you can, if you mix those colors together, not physically mix them, but use that in lighting or in your background or in your objects, you'll find that it's a very, very pleasing combination. It's used a lot. I see it over and over and over again. If you're familiar with a photographer named Joe McNally, Joe McNally is a guy who's been around for a long time. He can shoot it. He's worked for Geographic. I mean, he's done everything for everybody. Probably one of the few people that I would call an expert generalist, which is rare nowadays. There aren't too many generalists, but he can shoot just about anything. Anyway, he uses a lot of this as well, warm tones and cool tones. I'll show you an example of one where I did this. This is one where I was photographing a blues musician. This is a internationally known blues musician. His name is Tab Benoit. And this was backstage at a concert where I had like maybe 5 minutes with him. And I had set this up ahead of time, and I wanted something a little different. And so instead of having him holding the guitar, which is normally what you would do, I had his manager put it over in the right-hand side there where the makeup or the dressing room was. So you could still see it, but again, the warm tones or the incandescent bulbs on the right gave it that nice warm tone. Well, it contrasted the blue, which he's a blues musician, so it was a little bit literal, but also the fact that the lighting on the bottom by his feet is natural and comes from the lights that they have there they can see when they're walking on stage, because this is right backstage. Just to the left of there's a door that you can't see, and that goes right on to the back of the stage. So I wanted to contrast the blue and the warm tones with that, and then also him being a blues musician and wearing a blue shirt was something that I wanted to bring out using color. So the point is, you can see that color can be very, very powerful and very useful, not just in making it pretty, but also in getting a message across or conveying something. So if you look at these, again, these things if you took red and green, they're kind of opposites. So it's Christmas colors in a way, I guess you could say. But, you know, green is kind of danger, and red is kind of danger, and green is kind of growth. So they're the opposites. You can mix black and white, of course, is always a good combination. Anyway, these are complementing colors. I encourage you to kind of study this and look this up, because you're going to find that it's very, very important, and it will definitely make a big impact on your images and give you much more control over what you're trying to say with your images by using different colors. You can use gels if you wanted, or you can just use material. So, for example, a couple weeks ago, I don't wish I had it here handy now, Annette had a picture I showed you guys. This was when we were doing the photo reviews. She had a picture of a young lady on a couch with a blue dress in the snow. And while the blue and the snow were not necessarily complementary or opposites, it worked really, really well. Some people said you could use red, which would also work. That would definitely be an opposite, the cool tones of the snow with the warm, vibrant colors of the red. But either one of those worked in that situation. So by using wardrobe and color in your images, you can really, really make a big difference and an impact in something. So that's something I encourage you to think about. Also, if you're doing family portraits and things like that, that's also something to think about. So I always tell people solid colors. You know, you don't want anything too busy if possible. So you want solid colors. They don't all have to dress the same, of course, but if they have something, if you want to give them some guidelines on the colors you want them to wear, that'd be great. But the point is that understanding how those colors will react, like for example, greens and blues can sometimes be complementary, but they can also make a person look pale if they have very light skin anyway. And so that may be something you want to stay away from. Anyway, that's just how one way how color can be used. Okay, so again, these are the 7 elements that we talked about tonight. I'll go over them again real quickly. Shapes, or excuse me, lines, which can be used to draw the attention of the subject, or excuse me, the viewer to your image, to the subject that you want them to look at. Shapes can give you, again, strength, can denote strength or weakness or stability. Form can give you the ability to show depth, distance, and put a three-dimensional world and display it more in a two-dimensional medium. Again, photography. Space, of course. Space is the ability to distance things out, to spread them out, one in front of the other, which again can show depth. This is the other thing that you want to, I notice you want to show. Don't make your images look flat. Try and give them depth. And you do that by using all the elements that we're talking about here, but definitely space can you be used to show depth. And of course, texture was pretty obvious one. Texture is typically done by lighting something from the side. If there's a real gnarly or interesting texture to it, if you light it straight on, it's going to be flat. In fact, one technique that I use when I'm doing portraits or photographing people in general is if it's a man, then I like to have a little bit of dramatic lighting. So I'll have that lighting a little more over to the side, okay? And I can show some of the structure in his face and, that kind of the weathering of it, depending on, I know we've all seen pictures of weather-beaten men with their beards or whatever and their faces. But if it's a woman and I want to be more complimentary to her, I would typically light that more straight on. And the reason is by lighting it straight on, you don't get that texture. It hides the texture. There's no shadows. That's why ring lights are so nice. That's why for some things, unless you wear glasses, and then they're kind of difficult because you got these red circles or these white circles in there. But so by lighting an object head on, you're going to hide a lot of that. But so that my point is, if you're trying to bring out texture, you need to know this, because if you're trying to hide texture, then you want to light something a little more flat or a little more straight on. If you want to bring out the texture, then you want that lighting to be the side. You want some of that shadow. So texture is very important in being able to show character of something and to show the dimension. Otherwise, and I think I showed it in the very first presentation, the part 1 of this, where I had 2 spheres, one black and one white. And what was interesting, if you go back and look at that video, the black, we'll call it an 8-ball, the only way you could tell it had any depth at all was because of the specular highlight, the white part on the ball, the reflection. Okay, otherwise it would just go into darkness. The white object, the cue ball, was the opposite. The only way it could show texture or shape was by shadow. So you had to have shadow to give that some. If they were both the same, lit exactly the same, then almost the dimension goes away. You really couldn't even tell. In some cases, you can still tell what color they are, but in some cases it disappears and they look like they're the same shape and the same color. So anyway, my point is that texture is very important. Texture is definitely related to lighting and how you're going to light something. And if you want to bring out the texture, you want to light it from the side. If you want to hide the texture, you want to light it a little more straight on, evenly, to hide that. Value, again, is the percentage or the amount of white, blacks, or intensity of color or lack of color. Value would be the same as if you were doing color. Again, if you notice in your Lightroom or Photoshop, you can adjust hue and these other things. That's going to adjust the value of that color. But typically, it's really related to black and white. A lot of people talk about it in black and white because of the roughly 10 stops of light from going from pure black to pure white. So, again, you may keep in mind, a lot of times, let me back up. A lot of times people will show me a picture and they'll say, hey, Lee, how do I get rid of this blown out background? The background is pure white, and this subject is lit, of course, but there's no detail in the background. That's exactly the point about value. The value of that background is so high, it's 10 or above, there's no detail left in it. And so if you don't understand how to manipulate those values in your lighting, then you have no control of it. The other thing, it's also referred to as lighting ratio or contrast ratio. There's just so much white brightness value compared to darkness value that you can't cram all that into one image. So, and this is not a lighting seminar because I don't want to go into too much detail here. But the way you would typically do that is by exposing for the background, bring it down, and then add your own lighting, and that will then allow you to control the contrast ratio. Anyway, and of course the last one is color, as we talked about. Color has a big meaning on things. Just if you notice this, not extravagant, but just the set that I use here, right? I have blue in the background because that's a that's a complementary color to the light, to the white, or to the warm tones of the lights that I'm using here. So it gives it depth, it's not just the depth of field, because this is not that far away. I mean, I can touch everything back here. People think this is just like a mile. This is okay. So this is only within arm's length away. So it's not a depth of field issue, but by using the light and the color, by making the background darker, and by making it blue, which is a contrast or complementary color to my face and the lighting here, it gives it depth. So that's my point. What I'm trying to get across is you manipulate color not just to make pretty pictures, but also to draw the viewer's attention where you want them to go. Okay, hope that helps. And finally, again, we kind of reiterate this. If you don't understand the language, right? If you're trying to speak Spanish and you don't understand Spanish, then it's pretty hard to communicate. And composition is really all about arranging these elements that we call, art elements, or things that our brain interprets. And this is how you communicate, by understanding this language and being able to implement this language. This is how you get your message across. And I am a big believer in the way that I teach is not teaching. I don't start with the camera. I start with your eyes. I start with seeing. I start with telling a story. That's more important than learning the camera. A fancy camera, in other words, I could set the settings on the most expensive camera and hand it to you, but so is the picture going to be great because of that? Because you shot on manual or auto or aperture priority or what? No. It's how you're going to see the image, how you're going to compose it, and how you're going to photograph it. So it's the composition that's more important than anything else. So that's why I teach people first to learn to see, and then learn to tell that. Once they were able to learn to see, they take that and learn to tell a story, use those elements to tell a story, to be purposeful in your images. So if you don't understand the language, it's really hard to communicate. And that's really what learning the 7 elements of art are that I'm talking about. So I hope that has been helpful. If you have any questions, ask them, and I'll try and answer them now. But I guess the last thing I really just want to say is that I don't care what kind of camera you use. I don't care if you use an iPhone or a smartphone of any kind. I've seen some amazing images come from a phone. Why? Because they use these elements I'm talking about. A great image uses many of these elements, not all of them, but many of them, and they understand how they work. And it doesn't matter if you're using a Hasselblad or a Phase 1 or a Sony or a Canon, whatever. It matters about how you understand the language that it takes to speak photography. I'm not trying to be funny here or to be goofy on this whole thing, but that's really what it's all about. And it's hard. It's the hardest part of, actually, I believe, photography. I can teach anybody the technical stuff. It's easy. It's the same. Aperture is aperture. Shutter speed is shutter speed. ISO is ISO, right? They all relate. It's math in a way. So it is math, actually. But the point is that it's never changed. It's the same as it was when we were shooting film. So that part's easy. It's a given. I can teach that to anybody. But teaching you how to see, teaching you how to tell a story is much more difficult. But that is what will make you a good, or at least hopefully a great photographer. The more you experiment with these things, the more you learn these things and try them, the better you'll be. Now, it takes time. So pick one. For example, I would say one lesson would be to go out and say, okay, I'm going to just focus on lines. I'm going to look for lines. I'm not going to look at shapes. I'm not going to look at color. I'm only going to look at line, and I'm only going to photograph geometric lines. Or you could do shapes, I guess. But anyway. And then the next time you go out, do color or do something else. But pick one of these things and work on them and learn to see these 7 elements. And if you do this, I promise you, your work will get better. You'll improve. Because these are universal. It doesn't matter what country you're from. Now, people interpret different things in language differently. That's why I said it's kind of arbitrary. But for the most part, the language is the same, and the human brain reacts the same. So if you learn these elements and you learn how to manipulate them and how to include them or exclude them from your photos, I promise you your images will be much, much stronger. So I hope this has been helpful. I'm actually working on an entire course on this. It's going to dive much, much deeper in this if you're interested. It won't get geeky. It won't get too, but it'll be more samples, more photography related, more showing you how to shoot and use these elements more purposefully. But I wanted to at least touch on this and give you guys some samples, some examples, and maybe wet your whistle a little bit and get you thinking about this, because it's probably, again, the most important thing you can learn when it comes to photography, more so than aperture, shutter speed, and those other things. So anyway, I think that's about it. I don't think I have anything else. I don't think you guys have any more questions. So I appreciate you guys joining me tonight. I hope it's been helpful. And if you have any questions, again, you can always, whoops, wrong one, sorry. You can always shoot me an email to help@photomentor.tv. And I'll be glad to try and answer anytime you want, or you can hit me up over on Facebook. As again, I said before, might be interested in joining our Facebook group if you're an inquisitive sort and you really want to learn, you want more of this kind of stuff and not more of the old, the stuff that's just techno weenie stuff, but more photography stuff. Consider that, and we'd love to have you over there if that's the case. So again, everybody have a good evening, and we'll see you next week.